So welcome from me. Great to see so many familiar faces in the audience here today as well. As Jim said, what I want to do is really share some of the key findings and outcomes from the survey many of you completed before attending Cloud and Data Center Edge. And I always like to start with a bit of a thought provoker, a quote if you like, and this is from Stephen Covey, who's the author of The 7 Habits of Highly Effective People. And he said, the key is not to prioritize what's on your schedule, but to schedule your priorities. And I think the key word there is your. We're so often kind of driven by other people's priorities, other people's objectives, and we sometimes lose track of what we need to focus on and how we need to prioritize things that are important to us, really delivering on our roles effectively. And with that, I'd like to start off by just sharing what you told us were some of your key business priorities for the next 12 months. And these are all sort of discussion points that you can share and discuss amongst each other as we go through the day and beyond, of course, as well. And just saying a bit of a comparison there between 2022 last year and indeed this year. And what we can see is, probably unsurprisingly, building a secure and trusted organisation has really jumped to the top of the list. Obviously, we've seen some fairly high-profile breaches last year, another one just a few days ago as well. And it's really driven the security conversation to the top levels of every organisation. But increasingly, I did for example, I did a roundtable last week in Melbourne with about 12 to 15 government CISOs in Victoria. And a lot of it also is, how do we react when we get these challenges, when we get these breaches? We can do everything we can to try and protect infrastructure, the perimeter, but a breach is ultimately inevitable. So being prepared for that, how we react and how we ensure that the business can recover effectively is increasingly a major focus. Improving operational effectiveness, and it's interesting, I've been an analyst for many years, certainly presented on these topics many times, and that is consistently a number 1 to number 3 top priority. Whether you're a cloud and data center leader, a CIO or a CTO, we're continually striving to do things more effectively and ultimately more efficiently as well. And that drives into what Jim was speaking about with the exponential value roadmap as well. Much of that is how we can drive greater efficiencies to optimize expenditure and drive better return on value to our technology investments as well. Interesting, attracting and retaining talent has kind of slipped down the list in terms of priority. However, as we'll see, we're still certainly impacted by skill shortages. We're seeing a much stronger focus from many organisations, and of course many gathered here today, on how we can actually develop our people internally, driving greater efficiencies in what they're doing to free up time to actually help augment some of those challenges from a skills point of view we're facing within the organisation. Improving data-driven approaches to business, and again, thinking back to what Jim was talking about, that's what it's all about. How can we get the right information, the right insights to make those fact-based decisions for the right outcomes within the organisation? It's interesting when we look at the whole cost side of things, because when we ask organisations about their budget expectations for the year ahead, we're not seeing a massive pullback. We're not seeing a real slash and burn mentality out there, but we are seeing greater scrutiny on the investments we're making, and really making sure that there's a clear alignment between investments in technology and the value it's going to drive back to the business. I would say also we're seeing a bit more of an incremental approach to many technology projects. Those kind of big 20, 30, $40 million projects are kind of being chunked down for many organizations so that we can show that incremental value along the way. So that's our priorities. What's kind of holding us back on delivering on some of our key sort of technology projects? Competing business priorities. And this was the same when we surveyed CIOs just back in February. That continued and consistent sort of misalignment within our organization. We're not working collectively across, finance, technology, people, security, on sort of common objectives and common purpose. So we're finding that when we're trying to get wider buy-in across the organization, we're lacking that alignment of priority and focus. Interestingly, when you actually do look across priorities, across different personas in Australian organisations, we are actually pretty aligned. We're all focused on many of the same things: talent, doing things more efficiently, optimising costs. The problem is we're just not talking to each other, right? And really working collectively to overcome some of these big challenges. I mentioned talent shortages. We're still being hamstrung with legacy tech and legacy mindsets. When we want to modernise and increase investment, trying to overcome the architectural challenges that come with implementing new tech with existing technology is a major challenge. Equally, this increasing technology debt, if you like, that we have within the organisation as well. Trying to justify, and I'll talk a bit about this later, justify to our finance leaders, for example, why we need to invest in new tech when we've got so much existing technology in the organisation as well is a major challenge, I think, for many of you. And lack of budget for transformation initiatives. And that's an interesting one, because if I move on to the next slide, we talk about transformation, we talk about modernisation, as Jim was speaking about earlier on as well. When we ask CIOs, technology leaders across Australia, as you can see here actually in February, how much of their IT budget was allocated to innovation, they told us on average it's only about 6%. So we want to transform, we want to modernise, yet we're really hamstrung with the budget side of things to actually innovate and transform. It's the classic, we're still spending 60 to 65% of our budgets just keeping the lights on the operational, the run side of things as well. So that comes back to how can we improve operational effectiveness to free up more budget to allow us to innovate, to allow us to transform. When we asked a question during the pandemic through probably 2 to 3 very major across Australia and New Zealand surveys around sort of innovation and plans around that, by and large we saw probably 50 to 60% of organisations said they wanted to increase investment in innovation, but we're still being held back by legacy technology, legacy debt and so on. One of the areas, obviously, when we think about modernisation that we've kind of leaned into very heavily is obviously cloud, particularly public cloud. And what we see here is organisations who tell us they're highly modernised. So we've got high, moderate and low modernisation levels within organisations, which Archie and I will talk about later on in more detail. What you can see here is organisations who tell us they're highly modernised typically have 60% of their workloads in the public cloud. So there's a direct correlation between how transformed we are and the workloads we actually have within the public cloud. And to that point, as we've been surveying organisations and looking at the continued sort of migration and move towards cloud environments for several years now, and this is looking back to 2020 through to 2023. And just to give you a sense, when you look at the 2023 forecast line, for example, that was what organisations were telling us 2 years previously in 2021. So the forecast is a sort of look into the future for 2 years from now, basically. But what we've seen, as you look in 2022 compared to right now, is a little bit of a flattening in many ways of those sort of public cloud workloads, sort of flattening out about 38%. So there's a little bit of a stall in some ways happening in many areas at the moment. A lot of that is coming off the very significant acceleration we saw during the pandemic. You can see between 2020 and 2022, we went from 26 to 38%. So there's that massive jump over those 2 years. And now there's just a little bit of a pause. And that's really being exacerbated, I think, by a lot of questions coming through as to the cost side of things related to cloud particularly. Is it delivering on the promise that we've set within the organisation and so on? And it's interesting because I kind of look on this side rather cheekily saying holes in the cloud here, right? Are the holes actually starting to appear in the cloud? And we'll hear a lot today about cloud, and I'm not for a moment saying it's all falling apart kind of thing, but there are some challenges really accelerating within many organisations when we think about cloud environments in general. So here we see some of the significant sort of cloud migration challenges within organisations that we've surveyed. And this is obviously comparing last year with this year as well. So legacy systems and applications is that sort of number one challenge. And a lot of that is how we actually integrate existing environments into cloud environments as well. Those architectural challenges, for example, having the right skills and capabilities to do that. How can we get line of sight across our complete IT stack, for example, as our situation becomes increasingly complex within our IT environments? And that's that number two challenge there. Lack of internal cloud expertise, that comes back to the skill shortage. As we increase our reliance on public cloud or hybrid cloud environments, we obviously need new skills and new capabilities, and that's proving to be a real challenge for many organisations that we talk to as well. cost. And I'll go into this a little bit more. Higher than expected cost. We've all, I'm sure many of us have faced that sort of sticker shock when we sort of get the bills rolling in from one of the public cloud providers. And that's really starting to get much greater attention across the organization as well, when we look at some of the challenges associated with cost in general. It's equally, when you look at higher than expected cost of operations, the upfront costs as well are also blowing out and not necessarily meeting our expectations. So really big focus there. And security, of course, when we think about security and the number one priority we have to build a secure and trusted organization, how we make sure our data is secure in the cloud. Who is responsible for what part of data security, and how can we make sure that it's really in line with our desire to sort of build those much sort of trusted relationships with our customers and indeed our employees as well. So really quite a lot of similarities between 2022 and 2023, just across everything we're seeing right now. The whole security conversation is just coming much higher up in terms of importance and focus. And pretty much every conversation, whatever we're doing, we always end up with the question, so what about security, right? It's really coming into every conversation that we're having. So building on from that one as well, so that's looking at the cloud migration challenges. So what's actually happening? There's a lot of talk in the market about cloud repatriation. And I've had certain technology providers say to me, oh, it's massive, we're seeing everybody wanting to come back from the cloud. We're seeing others saying, no, we're not seeing anything at all. But we ask you, you are the people who are responsible for cloud environments across, as Jim said, organizations representing 28% of Australia's GDP. And if I just kind of double click down into this slide, particularly, on average, we see about 11% of organizations telling us they're planning to repatriate some workloads back from the cloud. I would say when we look at some of these numbers, 20%, for example, for SMB, 11% for mid-market, and 12% for enterprise. A lot of this is aspirational, I think, rather than actually happening. But the point here is that we're frustrated. We are facing the challenges I mentioned, and we are looking at how we can perhaps bring some of those workloads back to drive down costs, to reduce complexity within the organization as well. I stood on stage here, I think when Jim said this is number 11, I thought, that's my fifth then, since 2019, or 4 given COVID. But I can remember talking about this before COVID, and we saw about, I think about 7% of organizations telling us they were looking to repatriate workloads. So we've gone from 7 to 11%, which is a very significant jump. During the pandemic, when we surveyed organizations who had typically accelerated very rapidly into cloud environments, it actually got up to about 22%. Because they said, we're going to put it in the cloud, then we're going to bring it back. But in reality, we all know it's much harder than just sort of simply doing this. But the point is, there are certainly, I think, cracks appearing in terms of our thinking around cloud and its benefits. So to that point, when I said 11% of you are planning to repatriate, and on average you said about 17% of your workloads was the number you're thinking about, which is quite a big number. So we're not looking to bring everything back from the cloud, but where we are facing, I think, some of those more significant challenges, that's leading to those, you're telling us about 17% of those workloads on average may well be repatriated back. Of course, not all the cloud providers like to see these sort of numbers, but it's really important to sort of get a sense of what's really happening out there. And of course, number one reason for cloud repatriation, we asked you, it's cost. It's those higher than expected costs, the ongoing costs, for example, that is the number one challenge or the number one reason many of you are looking to repatriate. And then when we look at challenges in cloud financial models, if we consider the cost side of things in general, these are sort of 5 of the top challenges, if you like, in cloud financial models. And we'll talk a lot more during the day around FinOps and the like. But lack of clear fiscal responsibility, so who owns the cost of cloud, is one of those areas. Insufficient insights into the existing cost of the legacy estate. So it's not just about challenges related to what we're spending on cloud, but also getting a line of sight to what we're actually investing in right now from a legacy point of view as we justify why we should be moving workloads to the clouds. And also, I think, inconsistent approach to cost forecasting. We're really challenged, we continue to be challenged in really considering and forecasting what the actual cost of the ongoing investment in cloud will be. And as I mentioned, in our role as cloud and data center leaders, that's causing us real challenges across the organization when we're asked, so how much will this cost? And I've been saying this for years with the cloud providers particularly. They need to do a much better job of giving us that transparency. They've got so many use cases, millions of use cases around the world. They can tell you pretty much for any scenario what things should cost. So we need to hold them a lot more accountable, I think, is the point to that. Now, just shifting gear a little bit, I love this quote from Walt Disney. I've heard there's going to be a recession. I've decided not to participate. This is from way back, I think, back in the 30s. But the point around this one is that we can talk ourselves into recession. We can think ourselves into recession. But we need to consider what do we need to do to continue to modernize and transform in general. And with that point, I wanted to just dive a little bit into some CFO finance leader insights. Not many of you know, or not many of us knew, that 77% of CIOs have an active role in technology decisions. So they're not just holding the purse strings, they're actually very heavily involved in our ability to actually get technology projects over the line. And I think about 25% was the number, are kind of really always have the stop or go level of control over investments in technology as well. So with that, I wanted to give you a sense of what your finance leaders told us in November they thought the current economic conditions might have on budgets in the next 12 months. And I think this is fairly good news for us, as technology leaders. They expect a 14% increase in IT budgets during 2023. Our number one priority, building a secure and trusted organization. CFOs are saying we're probably going to have to invest about another 20% or more in our security initiatives in the organization. So really quite positive in terms of their perception. The one thing I would say, the caveat I would put on all of this, is they are absolutely being much more, really scrutinizing the investments that we are making. And coming back to what Jim was talking about, how can we ensure that whatever investments we're making, it's helping us deliver on some of those key business priorities and ultimately drive value to our customers, our shareholders, and indeed our employees. And these are your investment priorities for the next 12 months. I won't go through all of these in great detail, but if we consider data security was the number one priority, cloud security is your number one investment priority, followed by sort of cloud cost optimization. So how can we really make sure that we're optimizing costs effectively? Coming back to that number, I think number 3 priority we saw earlier on as well. And zero trust. So really getting that full line of sight from end to end from a security point of view within the organization as well, a major priority for most of you. So here we have importance of evaluation criteria for vendors. And again, I'm not going through this in great detail. You see security, operational resilience, fit with existing technology. So when you're talking to your technology providers, and we talked earlier on about some of those architectural challenges of existing technology, making sure that they can align with what we already have is very important. And of course, ongoing costs coming out quite strongly. But as I said before, security just continues to be top of the list across most areas that we look at.